Welcome to the Trustbound Podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Trustbound Breakdown. This time around, we are going to review episode 9, recorded last week with the one and only Paul Gladen. So Paul made thousands of introductions over 6 years running the Blackstone Launchpad at the University of Montana. Thousands. And if you caught the episode, when I asked him if anybody ever said no to one of his intros, he paused and said he couldn't think of a single time. And, that's been stuck in my head since we recorded the episode last week. And it wasn't necessarily the number that was stuck in my head. It wasn't even the track record. What caught my attention, and I guess it just uh, stayed with me, is everything that had to be true underneath all of those asks. And again, we're talking about thousands of asks for them to work, because introductions at that volume, at that scale, they don't land unless the trust behind them is rock solid. And trust at that scale doesn't happen unless you've been consistently giving, consistently being a giver, and that's why I think it's the fourth time that I come back to this book. Again, thank you for the present to Gabriel Tudela and Pedro Marin from Landa Club co-founders, and I remember last week I put it up as I was recording with Paul. You have to be giving consistently for years, and it's very important for you to not be keeping score. Uh, it's how can I give consistently without keeping score? That's super super important. Um, so this breakdown, and again of episode 9 now, is about two trust-bound principles, mainly principle 7, which is again give first and sustain always, and that's the anchor of today's breakdown. And again, principle 5, which is signal over noise, which Paul surfaced through a very different lens, and a lens that we haven't had on this podcast before. So let me walk you through um, both principles, and let's get to them. So let me start with principle 7. So remember, and if you listen to Gabriel Tudela's breakdown, if you haven't, go listen to that one. That was a couple of weeks back. So if you listen to it, you heard me talk about principle 7 for the first time. Gabriel and Pedro, again, here it is. They gave me the Go Giver book, and for people listening in, the Go Giver is a book by Bob Berg and John David Mann. They both called me a go giver, and Gabriel added the sustainability lens, the idea that giving without boundaries leads to burnout, and that a burned out giver helps nobody. Um, I feel that Paul Gladen is what happens when somebody takes that principle and just builds an entire career around it. That's very, very special. because it's not as a philosophy um, that he talks about, but rather as the system he operates in. He moved to Missoula, Montana in about 2008 through a university friend named David. And, for people that didn't hear the podcast, he's originally from the UK. Funny because, he went on a 1 day workshop about raising venture capital. And he met a woman named Don McGee. Afterwards, they both looked around and said, "Hey, who are all these people? Should we just give them uh, the option to get together and sit again next month?" I remember that Paul talked about this figure, about 100 people, and 100 people in New York and in San Francisco. It's not a lot of people, but it's different when you talk about Montana and specifically about Missoula. That of course there's not a lot of folks. Um, so they created a LinkedIn group, picked a bar, and said, "Hey, if you're into entrepreneurship, show up Thursday at 4." And a bunch of people came. And then they did it the next month, and the next, and the next, and the next, and before they have done it every single month since April 2009, except, of course, during COVID. And that is basically about 16 years of showing up. And I think that is very, very special. And here's what I want you to notice. Paul didn't start the Hellgate Venture Network group because he had a business goal, but rather he started it because he was new to town and wanted to find people to drink beer with. Let's not focus on the beer. Let's just focus on the networking part of that. Uh, Here, hey, it's his words, not mine. And that is principle 7 in its purest form. It's important to give first, show up, create the space, and then let the relationships do whatever they're going to do. No agenda behind that. But the part that separates Paul from someone who gives for 3 months and disappears is 100% structure. He turned giving into infrastructure. The Hellgate Venture Network became a monthly rhythm, became a monthly cadence. And then we saw it with the Blackstone Launchpad. That became a role at the university. His practice of making introductions after every coaching session just became automatic, almost sort of reflective, uh, and reflexive, if we could even say that. He said that nearly every meeting with an entrepreneur would trigger him to think of someone they should be talking to, and for Paul to spark that connection. Regardless if it was a banker, an attorney, a founder doing something similar. uh, Paul built habits and the systems so that giving wasn't um, a heroic effort, and it didn't feel like that, neither for him, neither for the person that he was giving to. um, and it was just how Paul operated. um, and I feel that that is the lesson that I think a lot of us miss. You've probably been in a season and in a moment in your career and your life where you feel that you're giving a lot. You're making intros, you're showing up for people, you're taking everyone to lunch or to dinner or even to a coffee meeting, regardless if that is face to face or virtual. And then life gets heavy, work gets demanding, um, and that giving muscle just either um, gets hurt or um, is severely diminished, or sometimes just even stops. And it's not because you don't care, but because you just didn't build the structure and the infrastructure around it to sustain it. But Paul did. Paul built that infrastructure, and I feel that's why it compounded for 16 years instead of burning out in 16 months or even 16 weeks or even 16 days. Um, Paul also said something very practical about boundaries. He said that he's happy to take that first meeting with pretty much anyone who reaches out. It doesn't matter if it's coffee, beer, 30 minutes, an hour, 5 hours, whatever. But from there, it's about whether there's mutual interest in continuing that he decides to either invest or not invest his time and his energy. And I think that that filter is extremely important. Principle seven doesn't say, hey, give everything to everyone forever. It says rather, give first, but sustain always. The sustainability is what makes the generosity possible long term. Remember that we want this long term, not medium term, not short term. And that is absolutely crucial. Give first, but sustain always. And Paul might have a system for it that he built um, purposefully or maybe by accident, like when he talks about, just doing things and finding opportunities by accident in the episode. Maybe he built this system um, out of reflexes or by accident. So I guess the teaching moment here is focus on giving first, but sustaining always, and either be very um, purposeful in the system and the process that you follow, or be very reflective on are there any similarities in how you carry your network forward? Maybe there's a system that you have just built out of reflexes that you could just replicate. And now, principle five, which is again signal over noise. Um, Paul and I spent a good chunk of our conversation talking about AI, and his take was very different from what we've heard before on this podcast. Austin Walker in episode seven, two episodes before Paul Gladen, because episode eight, as you folks recall, is Paul Rios. Austin referenced Mark Cuban's argument that when AI automates everything transactional, human connection becomes the most valuable thing left. And Paul Gladen took that a step further. He said that AI is going to free us up to spend more time on relationships and not less. So automating the the heavy lifting, the operational component of our day to day, sort of like being our chief of staff, if you will. AI, it'll handle the busy work, the routine, the stuff we procrastinate on. It's starting to do that already, but if the change of AI has been exponential and it has been remarkable in the last 2 years. Imagine what we can see in the future. You know, um, so let's automate all of that, and what's really left is the human part, the fun part, right? And then he gave us the perfect example. He and his friend Mario both uh, spent the weekend building things with Claude Code. I also mentioned that I used Claude over the weekend to also, tinker with it and try to build cool stuff. Uh, they did it separately, and of course, I did it separately myself. But when they saw each other's LinkedIn posts about it this week, um, the first instinct wasn't to DM each other. It was, "Hey, do you want to grab a beer tonight and compare notes?" And I think that's incredibly powerful. And that's principle five. In a world where AI can generate thousands of personalized message, emails, and I guess try to personalize even touch points in seconds. And unfortunately, where every inbox is filling up with outreach that looks personal but really isn't, the signal that actually cuts through the noise is still a person you trust saying, "Hey, let's get together. Let's get on the phone. Let's share notes. Let's grab a beer. Let's grab coffee. Let's grab wine." Or, "Hey, you should let me introduce you to this person. I saw this post. I think it'd be very relevant for you to talk to this person that I trust." Or even, "Hey, I think I can help with this. I saw you were struggling with so and so." Um, so Paul said it very very clearly. I think he couldn't have said it even clearer. And it's that AI can't have the relationship for you. It can help, um, and it can aid you and assist you in remembering context and remembering who to reconnect with. It can surface context from old emails, meetings, transcripts, data, documents. It can help you be more thoughtful about which threads to pick back up. But the relationship itself, the trust itself, the beer at the dram shop, the kitchen island financial model session with a six pack, the great story that he told us, that's irreplaceable. So that's the signal. Everything else is absolute noise. And when you connect that to principle 7, you get the full picture. Paul gave first for 16 years, and for how many years before that, and for many years to come. And because of that, his introductions became the strongest signal in the Missoula entrepreneurial ecosystem. Nobody said no. Or, well, I don't know if nobody said no, but, nobody. I'm sure that out of thousands, maybe 3,000 of founders that he helped and is helping, probably somebody, said no. But it didn't come to mind for him in our conversation. Um, and I feel that either nobody said no or very few people said no, uh, not because Paul had authority, but rather because his track record of genuine giving meant that when he said, "Hey, let me help you. Hey, let me introduce you to so and so. Hey, you should meet this person," it really carried weight, like real weight. That given created the trust, and the trust became the signal. So here's the actionable piece, and I'm going to make it as specific as I can because I think this one matters a lot. Look at how you give, not whether you give or not. Because if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already do. You probably already give, and you're not conscious about it. But focus on the how. How is your giving sustainable? And is it really sustainable? Do you have a rhythm? Do you have a structure? Do you have a cadence? Do you have a regular space where giving just happens naturally? And by a space, I mean, is it a specific location? And, is it a bar? Is it a library? Is it somewhere at work? Is it a coffee shop? Is it, a space in your calendar? Do you have time, effort, energy dedicated to that moment that you visit regularly, either physically or um, virtually, where your mind is 100% wired? Paul had the Hellgate Venture Network every month. Back in my HubSpot days, I had, Startup Fridays. And now I have office hours for all the funds and and startups that I coach, that I advise, and the funds and the ecosystems that I'm part of. Um, and Paul had the Launchpad every week. What's yours? If you don't have one, that's perfectly fine. Build it. Start with something in the calendar. Pebble uh, generates an avalanche. Be very, very purposeful about building that avalanche for yourself. It doesn't have to be a community or a program. It could be a monthly dinner, a monthly uh, coffee catch up, a bi weekly check in with 3 to 6 people. I'm just throwing ideas and brainstorming live here. It could also be, a standing calendar block where you make one introduction with no agenda. It's really up to you. But, the point is, make giving a system and not an act of willpower. And build on top of that system, iterate on that system, on what works, on what could be working better, because willpower runs out, but systems and processes compound, right? So be sure that with your giving, you compound and that you're not resetting. So, two very, very, very important principles that we saw in this previous episode. One, conversation. And the thing I keep coming back to is that Paul never planned any of this. How special is that? He just kept showing up, he kept giving, and let trust do the rest. And I guess, yes, everything in life happens for a reason, but the fact that Paul Gladen kept giving, 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 karma just showed up and I guess showed them the way. This is uh, just another way of how important it is to see how other people show up and use trust and their network and their giving to add value, to build trust, and to build, enhance, and strengthen those relationships that help us in all of our walks through life. Very, very special episode and very, very special Trustbound Breakdown. If this resonated, pay attention to where trust has already been doing the work for you. That's where momentum starts. Learn more at itogai.com. See you next time. I'm Mauricio Suarez, and this is the Trustbound Podcast.